Please join me in welcoming our friend and ally, Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, to the stage.
Thank you. All right. Nice swag. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you all for being here. As Andrea mentioned, I've been involved with the National Institute for a very long time. We have a long-term, multi-generational family commitment, but I've never seen an event like this, so congratulations to everyone here for this amazing turnout. And I'm honored to stand with NIRH today and every day in defense of women's health and women's lives and women's freedom. And that is really what we're here to do. So it's wonderful to see so many longtime friends and fellow activists here, but it's even better to see so many new folks. I want to talk about movement building. And this is a reflection of the energy out there that gives me confidence. We're in a moment of great potential in American history. My colleagues in government who join me and my fellow honorees, Whoopi Goldberg, for your advocacy, your passion, your wit and courage, I thank you. And Carolyn Hirsch for her work in this amazing film. And it's great to have The Real Thing here. And so many great young activists who made the movie. I am committed to you have to keep these stories alive. And that is so important because the generations who have come of age since Roe v. Wade are not necessarily clear about what we are fighting for and what we're fighting against. And it is tremendously important in this moment in history that we make that as clear as possible. Now, I have my own story, which Andrea mentioned, which I probably need to tell more often. But a year before Roe v. Wade, I graduated from high school and dropped out of school. I didn't go right to college. Instead, I went to Washington, D.C., and got a job working in an abortion clinic. I was actually not a volunteer. I was supporting myself on the $125 a week I made. I was 17 years old. And abortion was legal in the District of Columbia, but illegal in the whole rest of the Southeast United States. No one knew Roe was coming, so we all thought that there would be clinics in Washington that would be serving women for decades, and thousands of women who couldn't find an underground network like the Jane Collective in their own states would drive or fly into Washington from Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, all over the South. And one of my many duties at the clinic was to drive out to National Airport to meet women flying in to get an abortion and take them back to the clinic. I will never forget those women, their fear and their courage. They flew in, almost all of them coming alone, to get access to a simple medical procedure they couldn't get in their home states, and most of them were doing it in total secrecy. It seemed to my 17-year-old self that I was meeting refugees fleeing oppression in their homeland, but they were fleeing oppression in the United States. And I remember women pleading with doctors that they needed to go home sooner than the medical staff thought was safe because they had not been able to tell anyone they were going to get an abortion, and they had to fly back home before their employer or parents, or very often their husband, learned that they had left town. So I learned an important lesson at a young age. If a woman does not have the right to control her own body, she is not truly equal. And if a woman does not have the right to control her own body, she is not truly free. So a year later, the Supreme Court issued its opinion in Roe v. Wade, and I said, well, that was an interesting experience, but the era of repression, of denying women's reproductive rights, is over. I never thought we would see women fleeing oppression in one part of our country being forced to travel to an oppression-free jurisdiction to exercise a fundamental right ever again. Well, I was wrong about a lot of things when I was a teenager, and I certainly was wrong about that. And I realized some years later that anti-choice activists, having lost in court, went to the grassroots in a way that pro-choice activists just didn't. We were relying on the Supreme Court. They organized at the grassroots level, elected people to local and state offices, became a key part of building the contemporary conservative movement that grew more and more powerful in the 1980s and 1990s, and we began to lose ground. We lost clinics all over America. We lost training hospitals. States enacted hundreds of abortion restrictions, so-called trap laws. Some were struck down in court, but many survived. And the anti-choice movement grew stronger and more militant. They drove every pro-choice Republican official out of the party and most out of office. And we now live in a country where, as Liz noted, we have huge areas with no access to reproductive health services at all. 89% of our counties do not have a clinic. There are many states that have one clinic for the entire state. And not for nothing, the federal government has been taken over by anti-choice, anti-women extremists. So what do? We fight back. We fight back at the state level. We fight back whenever they make a move, and we build the movement that we have been waiting for. That is what we are here to do. That is what you are here to support today. When I first ran for Attorney General, my anti-choice opponent argued that attorneys general had nothing to do with abortion rights because it was a matter of settled law. Well, in the Trump era, there is no such thing as settled law. We see new examples every week of how wrong my opponent was. All over the country, reproductive health services are under attack, primarily by state governments, but also by the federal government. And I'm proud of the fact that rather than being irrelevant, my office, along with a coalition of state attorneys general, have become a critical bulwark against these attacks. Andrea mentioned some of our work, but we're leading coalitions in cases all around the country. We have a coalition of 16 AGs fighting against laws that would criminalize the safest and most common method of second trimester abortion in Texas, Arkansas, and Alabama. We lead a coalition in the Sixth Circuit that got an order striking down an Ohio law to defund Planned Parenthood. That fight will continue because the Republican Ohio AG is seeking review by the full circuit. And last month, we filed a brief in the critically important Supreme Court case to defend a California law that is designed to prevent crisis pregnancy centers from deceiving and misleading women about the healthcare options available to them, something that Liz just spoke about. Very important. So I'm proud of the work we've done around the country, but my fellow New Yorkers, as your lawyer, I would like to advise you that we have our work to do in New York. As Kathy Hochul said, there is a lot of red America in our state, and there's a lot of opposition to reproductive rights. So we need to pass the Comprehensive Contraceptive Coverage Act that I introduced. We need to pass the Reproductive Health Act. And we have to do this because the threat is real at the national level. We have to ensure that whatever happens, women's rights will be protected in New York. And so, my friends, these are tumultuous times. We face challenges to the rule of law, our constitutional order, basic human decency. Sometimes it feels like challenges to our sanity. The New York Times did a piece in December commemorating my 100th legal action against the Trump administration. We're way past that now. But we are not here today just to win some particular victories in a court case or pass some pieces of legislation. We're here because we have to build a movement to take back the ground we have lost and to really be prepared to turn the tide of the incredibly successful conservative movement over the last 30 years. And it is as important to me as it was in 1972 for us to ensure that a woman's right to control her own body is always at the core of the movement for a more just and progressive America. What started as the resistance a year and a half ago is now becoming the next great affirmative movement for justice and equality in America, and that makes the work of NIRH more important than ever. This organization has never been just about fighting back and trying to combat the worst excesses of our opponents. It has always been about fighting forward, showing there is a better way, unflinchingly developing and advancing a narrative that ties reproductive health to the essential American ideals of freedom and equality. So let me be blunt. Those who would deny women access to contraception and abortion services do so in service of the larger machinery of oppression, discrimination, and violence against women. And in this moment in history, when we have an open misogynist occupying the Oval Office and have seen the emergence of the paradigm-shifting Time's Up movement, tens of millions of Americans' eyes that were closed are being opened. We see groups as I travel around the state, hundreds and hundreds of grassroots groups rising up, wanting to do something to turn this tide. And we have this amazing opportunity to dismantle that machinery of oppression, discrimination, and violence. But to do so, we need to reimagine the pro-choice movement and build a stronger, louder movement for women's freedom and equality than we've ever seen. So let me remind you, and there are some movement builders in the room, but for the rest of you, movement politics is not the politics of accommodation. It is the politics of perseverance. It is not the politics that encourages advocates to say, we agree to disagree. It is the politics that says, if you do not see the essential justice of our cause today, you will see it tomorrow, or maybe the next day, or maybe in a year, because our cause is just. And so I'm deeply honored to receive this award today, but what I really want is for you to join me in building the next great progressive American movement. It is time for every activist to rise to this occasion and provide all the support and leadership we can. Other generations of Americans have been challenged and called by other movements, the abolition movement, the women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, the LGBT equality movement, and they rose to the occasion. Now we are called, and the question is, are we ready to rise? Are we ready to rise? Then I promise I am ready to rise with all of you. Thank you.